The consumer in Europe remains fairly resilient even in the face of Brexit. Ed Rawle, Wood Mackenzie. The US FOMC held a meeting this week. What can you tell us about their planned projections?
Yeah, I think there's a few takeaways from the FOMC. First of all, their projections for the economy are not as robust as they had hoped, say back in December or even June. They're now expecting just one rate hike this year. That's compared to a December estimate or projection of actually 4 rate hikes through the year. So their actual GDP forecast has come down from about 2% to 1.8% for this year, and that's very close to actually what Wood Mac has been forecasting for some time. So I think that's one key takeaway, I guess, from the FOMC, that they're actually pushing back these interest rate hikes. I guess the other is that the FOMC are actually quite divided at the moment about what to do next. So there were 3 voters that actually voted to increase rates in this meeting versus the rest that actually wanted to maintain. I think the key point there is that Yellen is dealing with a slightly fragmented group over their expectations for the economy.
The Bank of Japan released their interest rate and was shortly followed by a press conference. What should traders take away from this?
So the Bank of Japan, that was a pretty interesting meeting. They maintained their interest rate. That was fairly constant, but what was interesting is that they're now targeting the yield curve. So they're really trying to introduce a sort of upward sloping yield curve to support bank profitability, but also pension funds and life insurance companies. Kuroda mentioned, they're aiming to get inflation over their 2% target, but I think that's actually quite ambitious. It's difficult for Japan to increase inflation in this sort of deflationary environment, which is really underpinned by a shrinking working age population. So, their work is certainly cut out for them, I would argue, to really meet their inflation target and indeed exceed it. But this allows them, this gives them more flexibility around that policy. The quantitative easing policy is sort of 80 trillion yen a year. So we'll have to see how this progresses. But it is supportive for banks, pension funds, and insurance companies in what is ultimately a negative interest rate environment.
The euro area consumer confidence came out this week and was forecast to drop. What is your view on this flash data?
So the forecast was actually wrong. So there was an improvement in euro area confidence. I think what we see is that this confidence measure is actually not far off its March 2015 peak. So that sort of post-crisis peak. So really the consumer in Europe remains fairly resilient even in the face of, say, Brexit. I think the issue for the consumer more broadly in the euro area is that it's been supported by what we think are really temporary drivers. We've had very, very strong employment growth in the UK, for Europe as a whole, in the UK, Germany, and also Spain. But the UK and Germany, you could argue, are pretty close to full employment. So that support is probably less, going forward is waning. The other issue in Europe right now is that the real wage growth has been supporting the consumer, but the issue there is that that's not been driven by strong nominal wage growth. It's really been driven by very, very low inflation, and that's been driven by low oil prices. So we're anticipating oil prices to come back a little bit. We've already seen them rise, or at least fuel pump prices rise in places like Germany. So the tailwind provided by falling oil prices is certainly dissipating. So that, again, is going to undermine consumer growth in Europe as a whole. And that's important for European GDP because the consumer in those countries has been really driving overall EU GDP growth. So it's a kind of key concern for us, for the region as a whole.
Well, thank you, Ed, for wrapping up this week's biggest stories. And thank you at home for watching. We'll catch you after the weekend, but for now, goodbye.